Hi there, this is John Fairhurst with my review of The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Joe Pournelle. The story is copyrighted 1973 and the edition I'm looking at here was released in 1993 from HarperCollins Publishers. In terms of genre, it's a mixture of military science fiction and a first contact novel. With a strong military component, undertaking a first contact mission for both the Terran forces and those that they're contacting. The book itself is part of the author's co-dominion universe, which now alternate a rather wacky alternate universe where the Soviet Union / Warsaw Pact powers and the US NATO forces didn't quite commit nuclear suicide or have one or the other side collapse economically, but instead joined together in an unstable union that lasted long enough to see that the development of an FTL drive and the forced emigration of humanity's first colonists. As seems to become a tradition in these circumstances, these were generally criminals or other shady characters that most people would rather not see littering their environments. Eventually, the co-dominion did collapse in fire and war, but a significant off-world population, humanity's future was relatively secure. Eventually, a Terran empire rose, then fell again, and as of this story, a second empire is in the process of enforcing its will on worlds that are still refusing to accept its authority. It's fairly repressive by our standards, with the main role of females being to provide the next generation, for example, with this represented by Sally Fowler, the only main Terran female in this story, fearing marriage, as it would essentially end any aspiration she has that didn't involve children. A fate made more likely, given that she is a high-status aristocrat within the imperial hierarchy. As at the time of this story, she's trained as an anthropologist and wants to use this training for the good of the empire. She's also been the prisoner of a particularly nasty revolutionary force, just to make life even more fun for her. The liberating imperial forces were led by Roderick Blaine, who'd actually pushed the limits of his authority in this rescue. So not unreasonably, he's expecting censure as we first meet him. But instead, he's actually given command of the MacArthur, where he was executive officer, and he's put in personal charge of a suspected traitor. Once back in civilized space, the MacArthur's actually tasked with intercepting a probe sent through real space and is presumed to be alien at this point, and is currently heading towards the local system's sun, so there's a definite time limit on this action. After capturing the probe, they find that the corpse of a life form aboard it, and there is no doubt now that they are dealing with an alien life form, the first in their empire's history. This set off a flurry of committees, meetings, and the 4 Vice-Regal Council to decide how to respond, this results in the MacArthur and the battleship Lenin being sent to investigate the alien civilization lying behind the dark mass of the Coalsack Nebula. The system of FTL travel in this universe is you have to be in a particular area of space to warp out to your location, but it is practically instantaneous, though there are some disturbances to human and electronic systems. But most of the journey time within these stories are taken up by real space travel within real-time space in getting to the actual jump points. Imperial ships also have an energy shield which blocks all forms of energy from reaching the actual metal of the ship itself. This proves to be quite useful when the jump point is actually located within a supergiant's mass. The ships arrive within the Mote system is quickly noticed, and a ship is launched from Mote Prime, but it's an asteroid miner that's the first ship to encounter the MacArthur, the only ship on the Terran side that's allowed contact with the aliens, the locals. The Motes themselves are bipedal, which is basically the closest they get to being human, and have a hip joint that allows practically 360-degree rotation. Though they don't have a bendy spine like Terrans do. The major difference is the number of arms. They'll typically have two fine arms capable of delicate manipulations, and a third heavy-duty arm. Heavy arm, which is basically can be used for heavy-duty work. If you spend any time on science fiction bulletin boards or Usenet groups, showing my age here, you may have come across the term the gripping hand here, and it's this third hand that's brought this meme into life. The Mote aboard the miner is brown-haired and supposed to be intelligent, though it doesn't seem terribly interested in communication. It is keen on transferring across to the MacArthur, however, and abandoning its own ship. Excuse me. When it did so, it brought across a couple of smaller, similar-looking creatures that the MacArthur crew reckoned were potential food sources, while gratuitously leaving the rest of these creatures to die in the vacuum it made of its ship. One of the creatures was pregnant, and when it gave birth, there was a storm of interest that when the other little creature escaped along with the baby into the bowels of the MacArthur, they caused quite a bit of concern, but are not considered to be any worse than the rats that are already infesting the ship. Any lingering concerns about the escapees were soon lost when the intelligent Mote was found to be fading away due to some unspecified cause. However, over the next few days and weeks, it became clear that something was altering clothing and systems on the ship, mainly beneficial so far, and that it was infested with something more serious than rats. When the ship from Mote Prime reached the MacArthur, it held a crew of brown Motes and a new form with a somewhat better developed brain and brown and white mottled fur. The latter proved to be a mediator type whose job was to understand these strangers from beyond the skies. And the humans found that they took on the personality of various members of the Terran contact group. Of course, both sides have things to hide. The Terrans, the secrets of the Alderson Drive and the Shield. The Motes, the fact that they breed, well, the usual metaphor here is like rabbits, but the Motes have rabbits beaten in the breeding stakes by miles. After a failed attempt to decontaminate the MacArthur from the plague of miniature Motes, Rod had to order its evacuation and destruction as they ran wild. Meanwhile, the human mission on Mote Prime managed to escape fairly easily, but MacArthur's midshipmen are caught up in a mission to action the ultimate destruction of the MacArthur, barely escaping, only to find that they themselves landing back on Mote Prime and in the middle of a power struggle between various factions on that planet. Finally, the humans come to an agreement with the Motes that lets the Motes send ambassadors to the Empire. Excuse me. Much of the book is quite absorbing and flows well. I don't know how much of the book was written by each author, but I find certain parts of the book reading as if they'd been written in a style more akin to what I would expect from a technical writer like Pournelle rather than a fiction author like Niven. This wasn't particularly helped by the occasional gazetteer-like entries we are given about various planets that MacArthur visits during the story, that sometimes run into the actual story itself. And, well, thank you for listening, and goodbye for now. If you've enjoyed listening to this commentary and would like to hear other reviews, please click on the like and subscribe buttons and click the notification button to be notified of the next review. You'll also find Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk affiliate links to the book in the description below. This gives me a commission on any purchases you make while following these links, whilst not costing you any extra. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.